Actually had a fairly good season.
Because of the kind of crops that you're essentially lending into, you have a sort of natural hedge
Yes,
against the desert locust
yes,
problem.
because for us, we're largely heavily invested in tea, coffee, and a lot of floriculture.
From your perspective as a bank, how do you approach the question of climate mitigation, or at least trying to ensure against unforeseen weather disasters? Because these tend to become more and more common. 2017, for instance, we had this insane drought, the likes of which you've not seen in decades. Following year, torrential rains. 2019 comes along and the rain patterns are all over the place. I mean, if you're lending into a space that's heavily dependent on weather like that, I mean, how do you hedge your books?
I think the starting point is to understand the cycles. So we spend a lot of time understanding the cycles. One of my most intense debates with my economist around, are we going to have a drought or not? And I think you remember saying, is it delayed rain or is it going to be? So we have to spend a lot of time understanding the cycles of those crops. The second part is to understand not just the cycles of the crops, but also to understand each individual farmer and their own circumstances, how they plan to deal with each of those calamities should they arise.
And your insurance brokerage side, I mean, they've had a fantastic year as well, and they've focused on embedding products across the boards too. So when you're lending into agriculture, do you also embed crop insurance into that?
Yes, we do embed some of those products, yes. That's part of the, so you build in your insurance, you understand the mitigations that you need to do that, you spend a lot of time understanding what the weather looks like. I mean, the whole aspect of it is that lending into agriculture and being in agriculture, you also have to think like farmers and be farmers. You can't just come in as bankers, you have to become farmers. And that's what we're very good at.
Looking at it from a different perspective, incomes have been stagnant for quite a while. Businesses have been struggling with cash flow problems. How strong really is demand for credit in this kind of economy?
I think there is, we can't say demand actually shrunk. In some way, the formal demand through the banking sector, remember, took a knock. So we saw a private sector extension of credit, I mean, hovering around 3-4%.
Yeah, for really long.
For real, yeah. But what we also didn't, what we were not factoring is the fact that we also saw a lot of, if you want to call it informal sector and digital lending, those numbers going up. So in a way, some of that was substituted through that process.
But it was a relatively small part of the book.
It is small, but this is on the small, if you want to call it on the SME individual side. On the corporate side, I think it pretty much remained flat. So I suppose the challenge you now have is how do we kickstart that demand and what do we need to do that? And I think part of the central bank strategy, if you notice, has been to reduce the CBR rate. I think, we've seen a cut early this year. And I think the expectation is that there will be further cuts. So the expectation is that we're trying to spare up that demand and create a new demand into the market.
Just for argument's sake, assuming that the central bank continues on that rate cutting path, but at the same time we've removed rate caps, so we might go back, for argument's sake, to use one of your peers' numbers, 16% lending rate. Would that still be enough to jumpstart that demand as you expect it to be?
Well, yes and no, because interest rates are only one side of the story. You still have a whole lot of other dimensions that also have to be dealt with in terms of what actually happens. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around government paying up some of the arrears that they have with private sector. So that also has to come into play. And I think we've seen a lot of movement and traction. I think the president made an announcement earlier on that they will try and clear those, and we've seen some movement around that.
The International Monetary Fund says the COVID-19 outbreak has pushed global growth levels so far in 2020 to below last year's levels. Now, the fund will be offering emergency funding lines for countries that have been hit hard by this disease. Some $40 billion of the $50 billion response package on offer is short-term crisis funding. The remainder will be available at zero interest to boost spending on healthcare at country level.
We know the disease is spreading quickly, with over 1/3 of our membership affected directly. This is no longer a regional issue. It is a global problem calling for a global response. We know the outbreak will eventually retreat, but we don't yet know how fast this would happen. We also know that we have a sound financial system, much more resilient than it was before the global financial crisis. However, what we are wrestling with is uncertainty, and that defines our projections, which at this point lead us to state that global growth in 2020 will dip below its last year's levels, but how far it will fall and how long the impact would be is still difficult to predict. It would depend on the epidemic, and it would depend on the timeliness and effectiveness of our actions.
Now, Europe's largest regional airline, Flybe, has gone into administration. 2,000 jobs are effectively at risk now after a bid for fresh financial support failed. The struggling carrier says the impact of the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak and demand for air travel was partly to blame for its collapse. Now, its website is advising customers to not travel to the airport unless they have made alternative traveling arrangements or an alternative flight. At the same time, Lufthansa has significantly reduced its regular operations and it's grounded 150 aircraft. The German airline has revised its operations in response to the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak, which so far has affected at least 84 different countries. Now, as we have been reporting, many regions in northern Italy are under quarantine as the country is struggling to contain Europe's worst outbreak of COVID-19. These precautions are also applying to those who have travelled to the country. Our correspondent, Natalie Carney, is one of those affected.
So I'm in home isolation, having just returned from Milan in northern Italy. The Lombardy region, where Milan is located, has been one of the most heavily affected regions in the entire country with the most confirmed cases of COVID-19. Now, I've been tested here in Munich and my results have been negative, but the Bavarian health authorities have advised that I stay home and that I continue to limit any interaction with the public for at least one more week. So here's what I've been doing.
First and foremost, I've still been working. It's been a good opportunity to catch up on a lot of loose ends. I've also been doing a lot of cleaning and sterilizing, and of course a lot of hand washing. Health officials say that ensuring your hands are clean is the best prevention. I've probably been drinking more coffee than I would usually, but it helps the hours pass.
One of the positives, I guess you could say, of home isolation is the allowance it gives you to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do during your regular day. I don't normally have the time to iron my clothes, but now I've got lots of it.
As the weather's been getting better, I've also used the time to tidy up my little balcony garden and teach myself a few new dishes in the kitchen.
So another important and rather exciting thing I've managed to do while being stuck at home is go through that endless bag drawer. You know, the drawer that constantly gets stuck because there's too many bags jammed in there. So I've had the time now to sort through it all. We've got the paper bags as well as the more durable shopping bags. Plus, 2 more available drawers now too.
And yes, I've been catching up on episodes of my favorite TV shows.
I've just received a press release from the Bavarian Ministry of Health, and they're saying a total of 37 cases have now been detected here in the state. Prior to this, there were only 11 confirmed cases, which means 26 new people have been tested positive for COVID-19 in just the last few hours.
As the numbers rise across the country, Germany's health ministry says completely quarantining or cutting off areas is not yet on the cards. However, several schools, hospitals, and workplaces, such as BMW, have been temporarily closed after positive cases were detected, meaning a few others will likely also have some extra time on their hands. Natalie Carney for CGTN, at home in Munich.
Now, China's Commerce Ministry says it never banned the export of face masks or the materials needed to make them, producing roughly half of the world's masks even before the COVID-19 epidemic. China has expanded its production levels to meet the explosive growth in demand. Official data shows that the country's daily output of face masks reached 116 million pieces by the end of February. For context, that is 12 times what was produced at the start of last month.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. See GTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's recap the stories making headlines at this hour. Starting in the Horn of Africa, Kenya and Somalia have agreed to resolve tensions between them by appointing respective teams to solve common issues. President Uhuru Kenyatta and his Somali counterpart Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo agreed in a phone conversation earlier today to appoint committees to look into a range of matters, including border security. Tensions between Nairobi and Mogadishu simmered over on Monday after heavy fighting broke out between Somalia's forces and a militia allied to a fugitive regional security minister near the Mandera border. Also, the Libyan conflict has forced flights to be redirected after the only functional airport in Tripoli was hit by heavy shelling on Monday. Nearly 300 civilians have been killed by air raids since Libya's National Army's commander, Khalifa Haftar, started his campaign to seize the capital last April. Government officials have expressed concerns about the worsening security and the humanitarian situation in the North African oil producer. Cote d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara says that he will not be running in the elections set for October. Mr. Ouattara was first elected in 2010, then re-elected in 2015. He ousted the then President Laurent Gbagbo, who refused to step down after losing elections that then triggered a violent series of street clashes. And finally, the International Monetary Fund has backed part of Kenya's government's plan to reduce the country's fiscal deficit. That decision follows a 2-week visit by IMF officials to the country. Kenya is keen to secure a new insurance deal following the expiry of its previous one in 2018. The Finance Ministry is now expected to set a budget deficit target of just under 5% of GDP in the fiscal year that ends in June 2021. That's a run through your headlines. Now, at the start of every year, financial executives around the world are presented with a shareholders' letter from the world's largest money manager, BlackRock. It oversees more than $7 trillion in assets. For the first time ever, BlackRock now says that climate change risks will be at the core of its investment decisions. CGTN's Karina Huber has more on what's hot tonight.
At the beginning of every year, the head of BlackRock, the largest money manager in the world, puts out a letter to CEOs. It's closely read by the financial community. In this year's letter, the firm's CEO, Larry Fink, put the focus squarely on climate change. In it, he wrote, "Climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects, and I believe we are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance." The letter came on the heels of devastating forest fires in Australia and a time when floods in the U.S. have become commonplace.
They've been saying for years that these topics matter, that sustainability and ESG is important to their investment philosophy, but now they're actually putting some more concrete terms behind their commitments.
BlackRock says it will divest from companies that present a high sustainability-related risk like coal producers. It is also pushing companies to disclose plans to make their businesses more sustainable and has vowed to vote against management that doesn't take action. Sarda says companies face over $1 trillion in climate-related risks in the next 3 to 5 years.
This isn't about being good. This isn't about social capital. This is truly about, better ways to manage and deploy capital, financial capital. And that feels very much aligned with their wheelhouse. This is about producing better risk-adjusted returns for their asset owners.
Other companies like Microsoft are also taking a leadership role in the fight against climate change. This January, it announced that by 2030, it will be carbon negative. By 2050, it will remove from the environment all of the carbon it has emitted since it was founded in 1975. At a time when corporate America seems to be stepping up to the challenge of fighting climate change, governments around the world, including in the U.S., Australia, and Brazil, are stepping away from it. Climate experts say this is a big problem.
The 2020s are the decisive decade for us to really make the changes needed in order to ensure that we're not going to get beyond a 1.5 or 2 degree world. And we can't do that by corporate action alone.
Whalen says governments around the world need to support policies and incentives to tackle climate change if we are to avoid the worst impacts.
I am personally grateful to leadership by CEOs like Larry Fink and others who are stepping up in the absence of government action, but we do need government action now.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Now, the oil-producing countries which are members of OPEC are considering slashing output. I'll cover the details in just a moment. But the idea here is to contain a plunge in prices that has been worsened by concerns about the coronavirus outbreak's disruption to the world economy and, by extension, oil demand. Now, oil ministers from the group's 14 countries were gathering in Vienna on Thursday as energy producers were taking a hit from a 25% slide in crude prices since January. OPEC's decisions to cut production have a dwindling ability over the years to boost oil prices, and that's partly because the United States has been flooding the market with relatively cheaply produced shale crude oil. By late Wednesday, the international benchmark for crude was about $51.25 a barrel, down from $69 at the very start of the year. Now, OPEC did finally make that decision. I'm going to cover that in just a moment with regard to commodities. So Brent crude is actually around $50 a barrel at the moment. The deal from OPEC is this: cut output by 1.5 million barrels a day, but they want Russia to join in, and Russia's not playing ball at the moment. And the threat from OPEC is, look, if you're not joining us in this, we're not going to do anything at all. The net result of which will be oil prices will certainly fall. Brent is 20% lower so far in the year. Will it fall further? We'll find out. Here's what's coming up shortly. Nigeria offers $268 million to support entrepreneurs and innovators. Where's that money going? We'll explore that next.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Minerals Council South Africa has released an interesting policy document that seeks to empower women in the mining sector. Now, the white paper on women in mining aims to address the gender imbalance in that sector. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with a review.
The white paper forms part of ongoing work that the Minerals Council, Government and Labour are doing to promote gender diversity and inclusion. It offers an action plan for member companies to follow in order to address this issue proactively.
I mean, we are just below 13% as an industry. To put that into numbers, about 54,000 women today against an industry that's about 450,000. If you look at my ultimate or our ultimate target in this, it's 50%. Or I want equality. But given where we are and given how we've got there, we've tried to look back. So what would be reasonable targets over a period of time? And we've come up with 30% in 2025.
It's not going to be plain sailing. There are hurdles that need to be overcome.
So what we've done is look at, the physical challenges and whether we can close those gaps quickly. So actual workplace is something I believe will be a challenge for getting women there. So we can quickly close the gap of what's needed to enable the environment in which a woman works. I think that will be challenge one dealt with. Challenge two is consistency of policies. So if I believe we can quickly align on what the recruitment or attraction strategies ought to be, and then what happens when a woman is in mining and how do we enable her.
The physical disparity between women and men is obvious, especially in the gold and platinum mining industries, but it can be minimized.
The Minerals Council has a whole division on modernization and is working with the Mandela Mining Precinct to look at what are the new things that we can do to digitize and to make it easier to mine. Besides it advantaging women, it's also going to assist with health and safety.
The gold and platinum sectors are seen by some as a sunset industry, and the nature of the way that the deposits are mined in South Africa is challenging.
If you look at the processing and the rest of the surface operations that support deep-level gold and platinum mines, there's of course opportunities there in terms of improving using technology to become smarter in terms of efficiencies.
The Women in Mining Strategy, or white paper, is ambitious. It has aggressive targets, but it's going to need the input and buy-in from every stakeholder, from the mine management through to the unions, and obviously the buy-in from the council itself. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria's government has announced a plan to provide funding for entrepreneurs and innovators to the tune of $268 million. Out of that total amount, about $248 million will be set aside for soft loans given by the country's central bank. The remainder, however, is being set up as a funding pool for young entrepreneurs in the country's tech space. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Margaret Sule runs this decade-old poultry business in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. She had envisaged an expansion with a high turnover, but in spite of the huge profit potential that abound in this agricultural subsector, Margaret's projected growth has been hampered by inadequate funding.
I have a big farm here, but my birds here, they are not much because of no money now. There are many people that are becoming, organizing farmers, these farmer forums. We have been going and attending, filling forms. At times they'll tell us to pay money, or at the end we will not see anything. So since then, I have not the opportunity to receive any money from the federal government.
But there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel for agripreneurs like Margaret, as the federal government has approved the payment of $268 million soft loan to support small businesses in agriculture and technology.
It will go a long way. It will increase my farm for me, and because I have a lot of customers, but my challenge is money. So if I can have that opportunity, I'll increase my base, increase my farm.
And experts say it will steer the economy in the right direction.
It will make a good impact in them, in the sense of it will eradicate unemployment. Those that they don't have work, they will get their work and they will be employer. They will employ people. Take for example, if they will disburse, if they will fund like 300 in each state, those 300 they can employ each one can employ 3. When you calculate it together, they will give you about 900.
Nigeria has been looking to diversify its oil-dependent economy, and agriculture remains one of the viable options. Many here are suggesting that government puts proper measures in place to ensure transparency in the disbursement and monitoring of the funds. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Still in Nigeria, the Bata Shoe Company has set up shop in the capital, Abuja. That move could herald a renaissance for domestically manufactured shoes using wholly local materials and supply chains. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with all the details.
Bata Nigeria is a franchise tied to Bata, which is a historic shoe company based in Switzerland and present in 70 countries. The factory, which opened in late 2019, can produce more than 500,000 shoes annually and employs roughly 120 people. Bertram Dozie, who is the chief executive of the newly opened shoes plant, hopes this Abuja facility heralds a renaissance for Nigerian-made shoes.
The gap has been there, as in to fill up production of shoes in large volume and quantity. And if you look at the growing population of Nigeria, as at the time Bata exited Nigeria, the population was slightly above 60 million, and today we're 200 million plus. So it's glaring what the market opportunities are.
Bata Nigeria also sells shoes directly to Nigerian schools for pupils as part of their uniform and stocks other stores in the country. Nigeria's government hopes companies like Bata can spur the local manufacturing sector, create jobs, and reduce Africa's biggest economy's reliance on oil sales.
If you pick up a shoe and you see it's made in Kenya, made in China, people are like, as simple as shoes, why can't we do this for ourselves? So when we started putting the shoes together and let people know that the factory is set up 100% and our citizens are working for themselves and producing these shoes, so people enjoy that story. There's also a nostalgic feeling because back in the 70s, 80s, Bata was also producing in Nigeria.
Nigerian manufacturing still faces serious disadvantages due to frequent power outages, poor quality roads, and jam-packed ports that push up the cost of raw material imports. The absence of reliable supply chains of rubber can also pose problems. But Dozie is not alone in hoping that the Made in Nigeria label will become a source of pride for consumers.
There's been a greater awareness, so people don't look down on Made in Nigeria products anymore. When I started, it was a problem. I first started without putting my label on the footwear we made because people didn't want people to know it was made in Nigeria. And even though the quality was comparable to what you'd find anywhere in the world, they just didn't want people to know they were wearing a Nigerian brand. Now people wear Made in Nigeria with all pride. It doesn't matter that much anymore.
It helps that a good quality locally made shoe costs around $45 compared with $194 for an import. Nigeria entrepreneur Saudat Salami believes the return of butter will impact the industry positively.
We will have leather here. There's no reason why the value chain of leather should not be complete here. There's no reason for us to export leather. Well, we can because we'll make money, but at least we should be able to complete the value chain here. And we are able to because the roadside shoemakers are doing it. And butter should be able to do it in bigger, far bigger.
The shift to locally made goods is slowly taking effect. In 2010, Nigeria imported $180 million worth of footwear. By 2018, this figure had fallen to $100 million, mostly from China. And with the reopening of butter in Nigeria, pretty soon the rest of the world will have access to products that are made in Nigeria. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
All right, then let's make a quick run through the currencies here for you. So the Kenyan shilling essentially still on that weakening streak ever since the central bank announced that it would essentially be buying about $100 million from the market every month between March and June. The short-term auction today also pretty interesting. It came to the market looking for its usual haul of $240 million. It got bids on the order of about $450, $460 million. A big chunk of those clustered on the long end on the 364-day T-bill. The average interest rate there actually falling a little bit, 9.1%. But as we wrap up the hour, American markets still pretty much in free fall. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 both down by over 3% at this point in time. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Rama Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.